research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of 𝐴𝒐𝒏𝒆𝒻?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The co-host of this program, 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐥𝐥. Eric, you ready for Christmas?
I hope to be ready for Christmas, and by hope to be, it means I'm absolutely not ready at all. I have yet to begin any of the preparation process, but the hope is solid.
Hope is in things unseen. So in that sense, you're very hopeful. Well, very interesting news for us at 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐥𝐥, and I think something that speaks to a larger point, and that is that Bill Clinton is back. He's mad, and he's mad at me.
I think an unexplored avenue for this podcast, because we do a lot of stuff, I think, really well. I think we explore and expose cronyism, corruption in the federal government.
Yeah.
One thing we have yet to veer into, maybe we'll do in 2025, is people could write us in and ask for relationship advice. Because if they did, I would say you want to find a life partner that obsesses about you the way Bill Clinton obsesses about Peter Schweizer. Those are one of the pieces of advice I would give if I hosted a relationship podcast. Because your boy is, as the kids used to say, Billy C is sweating Peter S.
And I have to say, this kind of surprised us, right? Bill Clinton had a book that came out last month called Citizen.
Yeah.
It did make the New York Times list, but it really didn't make a splash. Nobody talked about it. And then lo and behold, a couple of days ago, the Washington Post runs a review that mentions me, and we get a copy of the book and realize that I'm mentioned half a dozen times. And he talks about what happened in 2016, the 2016 election, goes after me, which means he's really going after 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐥, right? Because the book was based on our research. And he describes the effect that losing in 26 had on him and the role that we played in it.
So we will talk about that. But first, I just have to ask again, because if we're going to get into this relationship podcast space, we have to practice being honest and vulnerable.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question. What resonated with you more at a visceral level? The fact that Bill Clinton mentioned you 6 times in his book, or the fact that his book didn't do as well as your last one?
They're both right, I think. Really hard to pick.
I know.
Really hard to pick. But it is, I have to say, it is for somebody who has worked in the corruption space, as we have at 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐥 for a long time. We call out a lot of powerful people.
We do.
It is satisfying to know that when you call out somebody in a book that was published in 2015 called Clinton Cash, that here we are now, almost 10 years later, and Bill Clinton is still mad, and he still won't let go of it.
Next Cinco de Mayo will, in fact, be the 10th anniversary of Clinton Cash. And it sounds like Bill Clinton's still pounding the tequila at night thinking about this. Well, he writes in his book, I couldn't sleep for 2 years after the 2016 election. I was so angry I wasn't fit to be around, and I apologize to all those who endured my outbursts of rage, which lasted for years. Now, there's reasons why he's upset. Obviously, he is upset about the 2016 election and the outcome, the fact that his wife, Hillary Clinton, lost and Donald Trump won. And we'll get into what he says about you. But in their review of his book, which is, in my opinion, overly charitable for the Washington Post, he says, among the things about you, he says, Bill Clinton, according to the Washington Post, makes a good case that the New York Times embarrassed itself by getting in bed with a right-wing muckraker, parentheses, author Peter Schweizer.
Yeah.
Your response, Mr. Muckraker.
Yeah, I kind of like the muckraker label. It's kind of nice. And we're going to talk about this and we're going to dissect this. But the notion that this was kind of a right-wing attack, I mean, this is the entire approach that Bill Clinton takes in this, is that I'm a right-winger, so ergo anything that I write is not factually true, is just bunk. And here's why I think we're doing this podcast. I mean, it's fun to talk about a former president writing about you, but this is part of the effort that the Democrats have, I think, of wanting to resurrect Clintonism. They want to move away from the progressive leftism that they think cost them the election. They want to resurrect Clintonism, but to do so, you have to resurrect the Clintons, which means you have to try to deal with the corruption and the other questions that were raised about them. That's what this is, and that's why I think this is worth us going through. So we're going to go through what his allegations are, what his claims are, and we're also going to explain what he doesn't refute.
Yeah.
Which I think is absolutely shocking.
Well, and first, let's just mention that when the Washington Post suggests that Bill Clinton makes a good case that the New York Times embarrassed itself, what the Washington Post fails to mention is that in addition to the New York Times, who covered exclusively some aspects of your reporting in Clinton Cash, so did the Washington Post. They also had an exclusive arrangement. They did a big expose about Hillary Clinton's brother, who had become on the board with this gold mining company that had rights to gold in Haiti. So did, by the way, Bloomberg. I mean, many media outlets covered this story. Let me just ask you this, because I think it's an interesting point. Why do you think that in order to resurrect Clintonism, and by that I assume you mean a more conservative-ish or less progressive, less exclusive and more inclusive version of what the Democratic platform should be, why do you think they have to resurrect the Clintons? Is it because, I mean, if you listen to a lot of the left-wing media stuff like the Pod Save America guys, they lament that there aren't people out there who can talk like a regular person. Is that why Bill Clinton's so important to this?
No, I think the reason Bill Clinton's so important is, what was Clintonism? It was triangulation, they called it. It was deal-making. And the criticism from the progressive left, from AOC and Bernie Sanders, the reason Bernie Sanders ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016 is that she was a quote-unquote corporatist. And what did he mean by that? This is somebody who is doing deals, getting rich by doing speeches, by cutting deals with Goldman Sachs and with Wall Street. So the essence of it is, from the progressive left's point of view, that the problem with Clintonism is not only is it a wrong policy, but it's innately corrupt. So you have to deal with that issue in order to win over the progressive left. And the way that they're going to try to deal with that issue is by saying that these attacks are just quote unquote right-wing attacks. We're not going to refute the actual facts. We're not going to dispute them. We're going to just attack the messenger.
So we'll talk about the specific facts that we lay out in Clinton Cash and what he's attempting to refute. But I think, and that revolves around a couple of key transactions. But before we do that, let me just say other portions of this Washington Post review that caught my eye that I think are sort of, to your point, part of the effort with the Washington Post and Bill Clinton to reimagine what Bill Clinton's legacy actually is. He talks about how the Clinton Foundation, while Jimmy Carter is lionized for his post-presidency, Clinton has been more often maligned. That's because, unlike Carter, he's done well financially, thanks to paid speeches. And while doing good, partly because of what they call debunked charges, that the Clinton Global Initiative was just a cover for using Hillary's position as the 2008 frontrunner and then later Secretary of State to rake in cash. So they call a central premise of Clinton Cash, which is that the Clinton Global Initiative profited heavily because of Hillary Clinton's position in the geopolitical space, that's not an accurate claim.
Yeah, and here's the funny thing, is this is an example where they say something is debunked. And you say, okay, what do the facts say? The allegation was made that they used Hillary's position of power as Secretary of State and then as a presidential candidate. And they used that in a sense to steer money. In other words, she's a Secretary of State. She can make a lot of powerful decisions. Give money to her husband's foundation that also has her name on it, and that is going to help you. And the facts are simple. If you look at what the Clinton Foundation took in 2009.
Which, by the way, why is 2009 a big year?
That was the first year she was the Secretary of State.
So she is literally in charge of the world, kind of.
Exactly.
Okay.
She is America's chief diplomat. She's spending money, spreading money around the world. They received, during that time, nearly $250 million in 2009. And the amount of money they got in years after that, when she was Secretary of State, was around the same number. By 2020, of course, what happens in 2020? She's no longer Secretary of State. She's not a presidential candidate. The same foundation took in $16.3 million. That's 93.6% drop in donations.
So just to put it another way, when Hillary Clinton is at the height of her powers, she and they are poised to do the most for potential donors to the foundation. The foundation makes the most money ever.
That's right. The foundation makes the most money, and Bill's speaking fees.
And we'll talk about that in just a
huge.
second. And then when she stops being relevant politically, and she's not in a position to do anybody any good, and she's at the weakest because she's not the presidential candidate.
Right. She can't do anything.
She can't do anything else. Their donations are down 93%.
Right.
So that's a key point. Now, the other point, so Clinton Foundation makes the most money ever when she's Secretary of State. Bill Clinton also makes the most money ever for paid speeches when she's Secretary of State.
That's right. Before she was Secretary of State, Bill Clinton's average speaking fee was about $125,000 a pop. A lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
When she becomes Secretary of State, that jumps to about $500,000 for paid speeches. So in a huge jump, and of course he rakes in large numbers of speaking fees from like places like Kazakhstan, Russia, China, places where they're kind of currying favor.
It's not the rubber chicken circuit, it's the rubber goat circuit, I think is what they call it.
That's right. That's it, right. No, so it's an example. So, and this again is kind of the Clinton technique, which is you simply say something is debunked. You simply say something isn't true. You attack it as a right-wing smear. We're going to find that in some of the other things he says about me, but never actually refutes the underlying facts. And this is, I think, kind of interesting because when Clinton Cash came out, this kind of took us down memory lane, right? Because, again, it's been almost 10 years since it came out. It's interesting to look back at what some of the things were that were said at the time.
Well, and while you're looking at that, just to put it out there. So Bill Clinton's speaking fees, he gave 2 speeches while he was like immediately after president.
Yeah.
Got paid $500,000 or more.
Right.
So, but then his speeches start going down.
Exactly.
In the time in which Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State, 11 of the 13 speeches he gave for over $500,000 occurred in the window when she's Secretary of State.
Exactly.
So it was clearly a portal by which access was purchased.
Right.
And I continue to believe, by the way, and read what the media reaction was this too. Like, she's Secretary of State. Joe Biden's vice president. So
Right.
I think the Bidens, and we all know what's happened with the Bidens since then, I think the Bidens had a front row seat to how the Clintons monetized their position in the Obama administration.
100%.
And then just replicated it.
Right. And it was the same thing, right? We're not going to go to London and Tokyo. We're going to go to Ukraine. We're going to go to Russia. We're going to go to China, to these sort of corrupt places. But this Clinton attack, which is these are just right-wing attacks. We're not going to deal with the substance of it. This is what Joe Scarborough said at the time, and I think, he makes the valid point, which was we came out with Clinton Cash, the New York Times and the Washington Post. These reporters are not stenographers. These are Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalists. They actually went out and researched and investigated, confirmed what we found, found some new stuff. But here's what Joe Scarborough said, because they kept saying this is just a right-wing attack. He said, Peter Schweizer right now, he could go off to Vegas and go on an 8-year bender, and it wouldn't change the fact that it's the New York Times and the Washington Post that are coming up with these stories. These are, and of course, the Democrats are calling these outlets right-wing operatives.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of playbook that the Clintons did, and they haven't changed.
It's funny because I remember, dude, we were watching Morning Joe every day because they talked about Clinton Cash all the time, and they had Howard Dean on. And Howard Dean, if you go watch the clip, in fact, I think if you go to ClintonCashBook.com, we still have the clips there. Howard Dean holds up a physical copy of the New York Times and says, right here, see, this is what I would teach in journalism class. This is not what you do. This is like a right-wing attack. And they're like, Howard Dean, are you telling me that the New York Times is a right-wing attack?
Yeah.
And it's obviously false on his face. Now, there were partisan attacks from the media, but they didn't come from the right wing. And I will never forget this because I was in the hospital when my daughter was being born, and I was watching this interview take place. Listen to this clip of George Stephanopoulos. You went on George Stephanopoulos a week and a half before your book came out, and George Stephanopoulos asked you some challenging questions. And this interview made news, but for not the right reasons. Listen to some of this back and forth between George Stephanopoulos and Peter Schweizer, who, it should be noted, did not go on an 8-year bender to Vegas after this came out. Although he could have with the book sales, am I right? Here's George Stephanopoulos.
The Assistant Secretary of State who sat on the committee said she never intervened on any CFIUS issue at all.
Well, I think that deserves further scrutiny. I would question that. To argue that...
Based on what? Based on what?
Well, I think based on her track record...
Do you have any evidence that she actually intervened in this issue?
No, we don't have direct evidence, but it warrants further investigation because, again, George, this is part of a broader pattern. You either have to come to the conclusion that these are all coincidences or something else is afoot.
And that is, the Clintons do say it's coincidences. They say you've produced no evidence, and I still haven't heard any direct evidence, and you just said you had no evidence that she intervened here. As you know, the Democrats have said this is indication of your partisan interest. They say you used to work for President Bush as a speechwriter. You're funded by the Koch brothers. How do you respond to that?
Well, George, what did I do when this book was completed? I went to the investigative unit at the New York Times, the investigative unit here at ABC. I went to the investigative unit at the Washington Post, and I shared with them my findings. Okay, these are not cupcakes. These are serious researchers and investigators, and they are confirming what I've reported. So people can look at the fact.
They haven't confirmed any evidence of any crime.
Well, but it's not up to an author to prove crime. I mean, you think that when people first started looking at Governor McConnell or they started looking at Menendez, that they immediately had evidence? You need subpoena power. You need access to records and information. You need access to emails. There's all sorts of things that you can do. You can't leave it up to an author to say that an author has to prove a criminal case.
Yeah, that's an example, again, of the sort of the Clinton technique, which, of course, we now know George Stephanopoulos was communicating with the Clinton campaign based on emails that came out later.
Not only was he communicating with the Clinton campaign, what else came out after that interview that he had to apologize for?
That he was a donor to the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, again, it's the example of the technique. And again, it's the approach. What is the approach? The approach is to attack the motives of the researcher rather than attacking the actual facts themselves. So what are some of the other things in this book, and why is it sort of relevant? Well, we find that on in chapter 11, Bill Clinton's explained how he's getting attacked by this critic, and that he's attacking Bill Clinton for letting big corporations and the super wealthy off the hook by giving those he dismissively calls globalizers a forum to look good and do very little. Then Bill Clinton writes, unlike Peter Schweizer's Clinton Cash, which I'll discuss later, this is not a piece of political propaganda designed to help far-right wolves in populist clothing.
So he's not even talking about you. He's talking about this this criticism that the work that they do at the Clinton Global Initiative, and it's this writer for the New York Times, Anand Giridharadas, and so he's like, hey, this guy criticizes me. Now, he's nothing like Peter Schweizer, who he veers totally out of his way, the former president of the United States does, to mention you. And then, so he gives you a glancing blow in chapter 11. And then in chapter 19, he kind of gets into at the crux of the assertion. He says, that with the attacks on Hillary, they talked about the emails, and it was at the core of a reputation destruction campaign, Bill Clinton says, that was aided by in early 2015, the publication of Peter Schweizer's book, Clinton Cash. At the time, the author was on the payroll of 𝐃𝐫𝐤. It's worth noting you're still on the payroll of 𝐃𝐫𝐤. Funded by the right-wing billionaire Robert Mercer and working closely with Steve Bannon, the white nationalist head of the right-wing social media site Breitbart News. The essential argument of the book was that Hillary and I and the Clinton Foundation had gotten a lot of money by using her position as Secretary of State to give access to the State Department to our supporters, including donors to the Clinton Foundation. Though even Schweizer admitted he had found no smoking gun evidence, which, again, the smoking gun evidence comes from your interview with George Stephanopoulos. I mean, that became the thing. Right. Notice everything we said previously about the money that Bill Clinton made giving the speeches, the donations to the Clinton Foundation while Hillary was Secretary of State. No one has refuted those facts.
Exactly right.
So the threshold then became what George Stephanopoulos said. Okay, so where's your evidence of a crime? Put down the pen and pick up the handcuffs, big guy, if you really think you got something here.
Yeah. No, it's remarkable that this line of reasoning, and again, they don't refute any of the facts in the book. We have a big chapter in the book on Haiti, for example. And again, they resort to, it's this right-wing, wolves in sheep clothing, this sort of right-wing attack. But here's the thing, and this is the problem that the Clintons have always had, and that is, you look at what Professor Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia University, not a right-winger, a left-winger, a Bernie Sanders left-winger, this is what he said about the Clinton Foundation in Haiti at the time. There's a lot of money sloshed around, and everything is blurred, and it's not good. We, of course, talk about the Clinton blur. And there's a lot here that's real, whether it's quid pro quos or not. But the amount of schmoozing involved in the crossing of lines of one person putting money in a foundation and then Clinton getting unbelievable amounts for his speeches and then contracts going one way or another, it's not good. Those blurry lines have been seen by many people over the years. The book describes them. He goes on. People that work in places like Haiti, for example, saw the massive machine of the State Department / Clinton Foundation / private businesses, money flowing in every direction, Clinton getting awards with massive price tags that he charges, then money going to the foundation, then contracts going to businesses that were giving the awards. Nobody liked it, and people saw it for years.
So, fun fact about Haiti, I traveled to Haiti as part of the research for that book, and one of the gentlemen that I worked with in Haiti, who lived in Haiti at the time, kind of worked as a guide for us. I just had lunch with him the other day. It wasn't in Haiti. It was in Tallahassee, and he doesn't live in Haiti anymore. He actually lives in New York. And the reason for that is because Haiti is much, much worse than it was even after the earthquake, which made this part of the Washington Post review of Bill Clinton's book, I thought, especially noteworthy. He talks about the earthquake that killed 200,000 people in 2010. As president, Clinton had almost invaded it, but after the quake, still fascinated by the place where he honeymooned. Bill Clinton made 38 trips there.
Yeah.
Listen to this line. Despite corruption, cronyism, and government incapacity there, he's proud of what he and others accomplished in Haiti. Again, Haiti is literally in like military mob rule. It's gang violence everywhere. The Christian missionaries are killed. People who want to live and have a nice life there cannot do so because it is fundamentally unsafe. And that is after billions of global aid was spent in the aftermath of the earthquake that Bill and Hillary singularly oversaw and distributed.
That's right. And some of that money, as we pointed out in the book, went to Clinton Foundation donors. Some of that went to donors who then paid Bill for speeches. Again, they don't refute any of that. Bill Clinton does in the book. I found this particularly interesting in chapter 23, by the way. Chapter 23. Now, Clinton is sort of going after me because of the criticisms of him. But then chapter 23, he comes to the defense of the Clintons. He's talking about the 2020 campaign. He says the GOP followed its 2016 playbook. We were somehow part of a playbook, which is ridiculous. A critical smearing book by Peter Schweizer, a woman accusing Joe Biden of sexual assault and accusations about Hunter Biden's business deals in Ukraine and China. Unlike 2016, the political press, instead of signing partnerships with Steve Bannon and Breitbart, they didn't. We simply shared the books and they signed an NDA. There was no agreement, and the agreements weren't with Breitbart. They were with me. They didn't take the bait. The coverage was light years better and more on the level. Here's what's interesting about this. What he's saying is...
He's referring to, by the way, the book, Secret Empires, which you've spoken about before,
right,
and the reporting that you did about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden specifically.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me about this is what Bill Clinton is, without talking about Twitter X, the censorship on Twitter X, he is talking about how he likes the old school form of journalism, where if you've got buddies in journalistic circles that work at powerful publications, you can kill stories.
Like George Stephanopoulos tried to do.
Yeah, like George Stephanopoulos did. In this case, they were more successful. The irony is, he goes on to kind of, defend the Bidens and Hunter Biden, but the irony is that his book came out like a month, 30 days before Joe Biden had to pardon his son for failing to pay taxes on the deals in Ukraine and China that we talk about.
Yeah, no, it's an irony that the criticism with Clinton Cash was that you didn't prove a crime. In Secret Empires, we're not saying you proved a crime. We're just saying they pardoned the dude anyway, right? I guess the good news is you took the criticism to heart. You worked hard. You were better. You're like Michael Jordan getting cut from the JV team.
Yeah, Bill Clinton made me stronger.
Go work harder. Get in the gym, bro. But here's the other irony of this story, by the way, is that Bill Clinton's lauding the discipline of the mainstream media to not report on the Hunter Biden story. The reason for that specifically is because of all the criticism that the Washington Post and New York Times and everybody else took after reporting on the story about the Clintons that they think led to Trump being elected. And of course, that's like the worst thing that could ever happen. So they said never again. Everybody in the New York Times said we can't cover Trump rationally. Right. And that actually extended to them. We're not going to cover his opponent rationally or fairly. So they didn't. And obviously big tech and Twitter specifically helped to censor that story.
Yeah.
The question is why? And this is one of the key ironies. And this is actually the big reveal. We've been spending a lot of time pumping up Peter Schweizer. We're about to deflate that balloon. Because why didn't Twitter cover the Hunter Biden story. It's because they were told by 51 intelligence agencies that the Hunter Biden story might actually be Russian interference because Trump might be a Russian asset. Right. And that's why they kept that story from being reported, which in many people's opinion is one of the reasons, maybe the only reason why Joe Biden was elected, that and the way we cast ballots. That said, why and where did the idea that Trump was a Russian asset actually come from?
Yeah, this is fascinating to me. And again, this is not us saying this. This is based on a reporting by Jeff Gerth, former New York Times reporter, who shows that the material in Clinton Cash that exposed the Uranium One deal involving the Clinton family was actually a huge vulnerability. The reason they attacked me so aggressively and the reason they wanted to deal with it is they had actually done internal polling. The campaign did in 2015, and they found that concerns about this Russian deal were a key vulnerability. So what they did in return was, since we're being accused legitimately of cutting deals with the Russians and making money, we've got to make up the Russian dossier, the Steele dossier, and accuse our opponent, Donald Trump, of Russia collusion. So in a bizarre way, we are, in a sense, responsible for the creation of the Russia collusion hoax.
This guy, Jeff Gerth, actually wrote in a long article, a series of articles for the Columbia Journalism Review. He said, to your point, an internal Clinton campaign poll shared with the campaign the day of Trump's announcement showed that the Russia entanglements exposed in the book and the Times were the most worrisome Clinton negative message. So they knew their biggest vulnerability was Russian entanglements. So then in July of 2016, it says, this is this guy reporting this, in the Columbia Journalism Review, the campaign allegedly upped the ante. According to a briefing that CIA Director John Brennan gave Obama a few days after this, Clinton was said to have approved a proposal from one of her foreign policy advisors to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by Russia security services.
Yeah, so timeline is Clinton Cash comes out in April of 2015. The Clintons attack it. They do internal polling. They discover, oh, man, this really resonates and concerns voters. July of 2015, a few months later, they decide we've got to come up with an attack and we are going to authorize what becomes the Steele dossier. It's a remarkable twist. And the reason that so much of the Biden stuff was not covered, I believe, in the 2020 election and before, is because the media became obsessed with this complete falsehood, which, of course, was the Russian collusion hoax.
It's the holiday season. If you're watching on YouTube, then you can see this incredibly festive drill-down background we have, which thanks very much to our graphics department for putting that together. In that point, I'm about to put a really nice bow on all of this, okay?
Yeah.
We have said in Clinton Cash that your reporting in Clinton Cash helped Donald Trump get elected. But then also the reporting that you did in Secret Empires is the thing that Donald Trump made the phone call to the Ukrainian president about, which ultimately got him impeached, which is why we can say, hey, Peter Schweizer's his research has helped get presidents elected and then also had led to their impeachment. Yeah. What's now also true is your reporting in Secret Empires and in Clinton Cash, because of the vulnerability of Hillary Clinton's Russian entanglements exposed, led them to create this Russian narrative, which led to the active suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop, which led to Joe Biden's election.
Yeah.
We can now also say that your reporting led to the election of another president, Joe Biden, and the pardoning of Hunter Biden. Dude, dropping bombs all over the place. So we're sorry for the last 4 years. The fact that eggs and cereal are more expensive is not just the fault of the Inflation Reduction Act. It is, in fact, the fault of the man to my right.
Well,
Merry Christmas, America.
I tell you, the reason that our work resonates and has this impact is because it's based on facts and based on research.
Yeah.
We're not pundits. We don't do hot takes. And I think people really appreciate that and admire that. The media used to. And then I think with Clinton Cash, they saw the effect and the power of it. They didn't like the results, so they've ignored it. But here's the thing, to step back at the larger issue. Why are we going down memory lane? Okay, it's fun, but more importantly, this is where I think the conversation is going nationally in the future. First, when it comes to the media, the notion that there are media gatekeepers, as they were in 2015, they tried in 2015, as they were successful in 2020 at doing, the gatekeepers are gone. The gatekeepers are gone, which is great news for GAI. It's great news for me as an author, because now the facts and the truth are going to be what people look to. And I think that's a healthy, wonderful place to be. Bill Clinton's not happy about it. but the rest of us should be. The second thing I think it speaks to is the future of where the Democratic Party is going. There's a lot of soul searching going on. Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump bigly, as Donald Trump would say. And the question is, where do they go in the future? Do they go towards AOC? Do they go towards the sort of trans Democratic Party, which is where Kamala Harris kind of was? Or do they veer back to a more centrist vision? That centrist vision is Clintonism. But in order for people, the average voter out there, to embrace Clintonism, they have to at least have confidence that the craziness and the corruption they saw with the Clintons is not going to be resurrected again. And here's the problem. Here's the problem with Clintonism. Bernie Sanders is right. Clintonism is corporatism.
Mm-hmm.
It's you get your corporate buddies around, you cut deals, you do deals. It's pro Wall Street. It's supposed to be pro Main Street. But the reality is there's a lot of money sloshing around, as Jeffrey Sachs said, and that creates opportunities for self-enrichment. And so they've got to eliminate that notion that Clintonism is equal to self-enrichment. That old saying that you can do good and do well at the same time, people aren't buying it anymore.
You got to be a little frustrated if you're a Democrat, though, listening to this, because you're like, wait a minute. You're telling me that the Democrats' answer to Donald Trump, this old white guy that's been impeached a couple times and charged with some crimes, is another old white guy who's been impeached before as president and maybe should have been charged with some crimes if you'd done a better job as an author.
Yeah. No, and here's the other thing I'll say, too, is we have to be mindful as well. Look, as the Trump administration now starts carrying out policies, you've got people like Elon Musk, for example, that are there.
Yeah.
We need to have the same kind of guardrails. It's not about having a person that's a good person. It's about having guardrails to make sure you don't have this blurring of a line between sort of self-enrichment, certain corporate interests, and government action. So that's something we're going to remain vigilant about at GAI. We've been doing it in the past. Bill Clinton doesn't like it, but we're going to keep doing it anyway.
Well, Bill Clinton might not like it, but he likes thinking about it, because he did. And more importantly, he likes writing about it. Yeah. And not as much as you like taking the little finger and run it down the old New York Times bestseller list past the Schweizer tier. Keep on going.
Well, it may help Bill Clinton sleep better, but we are not doing any projects on the Clintons right now. So maybe he can start getting his sleep again. And we appreciate you, as always, taking the time to listen to this podcast. We know your time is valuable. We certainly don't want to waste it. You can find out more about the work we're doing at thedrilldown.com. And you can, of course, find this podcast wherever fine podcasts are located. Thanks again. Until next time, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah.